Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to a start. Can we please go around the room, just so that we all can introduce ourselves? If I start. Actually, before we do that, I'm just going to go through the fire evacuation procedures for evening meetings. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if a fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. This is a webcast meeting, so please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. And mobile phones, please can all members please switch their phones off or turn them to silent. So if we go around the room, I will start. I'm Carrie Ryan and I'm the Community Safety Manager for Safer North Hampshire.
Simon Bound, Cabinet Member for Community Safety and Communities at Basingstoke and the Chair of the Partnership for this year.
Jonathan Canty, Councillor for St John's Ward on Rushmore Borough Council.
All right, okay. Yeah, Councillor Alex Crawford from Wellington Ward, Aldershot on Rushmore Borough Council. Thank you.
Councillor Peter Collins, Ushot and Church Crookham West, Hart District Council.
Councillor Kerry Carruthers, Tadley South for Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council.
Donald Sherlock, Councillor for Kingsclear and Basingstoke and Dean.
Ryan Thurman, Group Commander for North Hampshire in Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service.
James Knight, Team Leader for Safer North Hampshire.
Marion Short, Community Wellbeing Manager at the Borough Council at Basingstoke and Dean.
David Lipscombe, Team Leader for Safer North Hampshire.
John Halfaker, District Police Commander for Hart and Rushmore.
Councillor Masterchan, Deputy Leader, Rushmore Borough Council.
Chief Inspector Matthew Reeves, District Commander for Basingstoke and Dean.
Okay, so on to the first agenda item, which is the election of a chair. Do we have any nominations for a chair? Yes.
I would like to nominate Councillor Jay Canty, please.
Okay, nobody else has any, then we will elect Jonathan Canty as chair, and I will hand over to you.
So, thank you, members. Move on to item 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. I believe we've only received one apologies for absence from Councillor Mike Smith. Is there any other apologies that have been given?
Obviously, Councillor Carruthers.
Yep. I believe there's just been one substitution, so Councillor Kerry Carruthers to replace Councillor Bowyer. But if there's no other apologies or substitutions, is everyone happy to move on? Excellent. Item number 3, is there any declarations of interest that any members or officers had to make? I'll take that as a no. Switching on to item number 4, urgent matters. So this is to consider any items of business other than those shown on this agenda and which, by reason of special circumstances to be stated at the meeting, in the opinion of the chair, should be considered as the meeting as a matter of urgency. I believe there are no such matters, so move on to item number 5. These are the minutes of the last Crime and Disorder Joint Scrutiny Committee meeting held on Thursday the 20th of 2017. I would like to move that the meetings of the minutes be signed as the correct record. Is there any objections? Super. The minutes are thereby approved. So we move on to item number 6, performance review of the Sathan North Hampshire Strategic Community Partnership 2017-18, and the documents outlining the performance review and strategic assessment can be found on pages 15 to 68 of the papers you've been given. Just by way of introduction and as a reminder, the function of this committee is to scrutinise the function of the Strategic Community Safety Partnership, so Sathan North Hampshire, where appropriate to make recommendations to Sathan North Hampshire with respect to its discharge of crime and disorder functions. And the idea is the committee members report back to the local scrutiny committee on the findings of this annual meeting. And whilst there will be an opportunity later on to ask questions on specific topics and issues relating to the strategic assessments, I would just remind members again that the function of this committee is particularly looking at the strategic role that Sathan North Hampshire has in tackling antisocial behaviour and other crime within Basingstoke, Hart and Rushmore. But I realise that there's a number of members here tonight who will not have attended the pre-meeting, which outlined a bit more about the actual structure of Sathan North Hampshire and how it operates. And so I'm going to pass on to Carrie Ryan, who's going to provide an overview on that topic.
Okay, so within our partnership, we have a strategic community safety partnership, which is made up of our statutory partners. Those statutory partners are the police, fire, local authority, Hampshire County Council, probation, the CRC and the clinical commissioning group. In addition to those members, we have, by agreement, co-opted the Army because of their footprint, particularly in Rushmore, and we have co-opted our fire colleagues because they understand the operational delivery more so than the fire authority. So we have that strategic partnership which meets quarterly and is currently chaired by Councillor Bound. And in that meeting we will make decisions around adopting the strategic assessment, around adopting the partnership plan and monitoring performance of that partnership plan, of looking at our membership and attendance and accountability within the broader partnership. But it's not an operational group, it's not about operational delivery, it's about making sure that we've got the right people in the room who can commit resources and change the way things are happening to make the operational delivery happen. So beneath the strategic partnership we have operational groups such as the Vulnerabilities Operational Group, who meet on a monthly basis and talk about specific cases around vulnerability, and that vulnerability might be domestic abuse, it might be substance misuse, it might be mental health, it could be extremism. So there's a whole raft of vulnerabilities that we have an analytical document that supports the work that we're doing. So if there are issues that are identified at that level, they will be escalated to the strategic partnership for direction. And so this is about the strategic partnership.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Also, as part of the papers that we've got in front of us is a report from myself as the chair, and I don't intend to go through the whole of that report, but really just as far as the highlights of it, just to reiterate really what the Community Safety Partnership is here to do as far as to prevent crime and disorder in our area, to prevent the misuse of drugs, alcohol and other substances in our areas, and also to prevent reoffending. And with that in mind, we've set out in front of you the terms of reference, the purpose of the overview and scrutiny committee, and really also looking at things that should be very, very important to us as far as identifying what the trends are, those things that come out of our strategic assessment, and also look at the achievements of the partnership. I think it's been one of those criticisms of perhaps this body in the past, as far as the scrutiny panel, that it's been very tempting to go to individual agencies, whether it's the police, whether it's the fire service, and look at what they're doing. And really this is about what we're doing as a partnership. So looking at our achievements, and I think it's worthwhile just dwelling on those for a moment as a partnership in the last 12 months, that we have also tried to address that focus in the way that we operate, as far as making sure we're very clear about our key performance indicators rather than using everybody else's data. If we have data that talks about crime and policing, that's what people will come and talk to us about rather than what we're doing. We also now have a consistent approach for domestic abuse across the 3 local authority areas as far as the Domestic Abuse Forum. There is a focus probably in all of our towns, in all of the 3 areas, as far as the street attached and how we best support the work that happens with that group of individuals. Looking at how we, probably when we look at the history and how the partnership has developed, how we connect local members with the work of the partnership. I think, in my view, lots of local members from different authorities were very engaged at the beginning of the partnership, but as it's sort of got more of a life of its own, then maybe it's become very distant. And I don't mean that distant in the work that it does, but perhaps distant from perhaps what goes on in this chamber and other chambers as far as local authorities, as far as making sure that there's some level of visibility of how the criminal justice system works, all the partners that are involved, and of course we also know the way services are commissioned. Those partners often change when who's commissioned to deliver services changes. So that's a piece of work that we've been doing, and also looking at a level of own self-assessment to say how are we doing in lots of different areas, and speaking to our partners, speaking to the members that engage with the partnership, as well as looking at the data. Data is really important for understanding how we work out our strategic assessment, and making sure we've got the data that we need and being able to interrogate it in the way that we need to do to come up with a very robust strategic assessment, and also thinking about how we increase the visibility of what and who does what in our area. If we think about the Safe Together events that happen for the whole county, it happened down in Southampton last year and it happened up here in North Hampshire this year. So all of those things are seen as big achievements for the bits of work that we've done, but there's also something about what others have said about our partnership. You've got a quote in the papers which talks about how the HMIC's appeal report reflected on some of the work that we were doing. And also, it's always very gratifying when others who work with us, and particularly we've got a quote in here from Assistant Chief Constable Chilton, where I know in many meetings he talks about what we do and how we do it in partnership across the 3 authorities is the ideal model that he would like to get others to do, to make sure that they are as effective as we are in other parts of the county. So all of those are sort of great accolades to have, but also making sure that we don't rest on our laurels when it comes to doing our own self-assessment on how we can improve. So I touch on that really in the report. Moving forwards, there is that focus on our own partnership improvement plan. There's also something that says we need to engage with other organisations that are doing lots of work which is similar, into ensuring there isn't any duplication, and also to ensure that we've got similar priorities and there aren't any gaps that are being missed, which is why I've also put in there working much more closely with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner going forwards. So really that's what I've touched on in my report, and you'll see underneath the strategic assessment all of the detail as far as where the priorities are and where we get those priorities from.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bounds. Just as a way of starting off the discussion on this item, I would just like to invite any questions around the actual performance of the Community Safety Partnership, its purpose and activities, and whether any members have any particular contributions or questions on that particular area.
I'd like to ask about the item on page 20, paragraph 3.4, with respect to the street attached individuals and the fact that the partnership has adopted a consistent approach across the 3 areas. Now, is that actually working? Because it seems to me, based in Aldershot, that Aldershot has very particular problems in the street attached, which might not apply in other areas. So there we are.
When we say we've adopted a consistent approach, that's about how do we manage end to end what we are planning to do around those individuals that are causing problems. The short answer to your question is yes, we do have a consistent approach. It is resource dependent, so whilst we're doing the same job, in Basingstoke we're seeing slightly different results because we are working in partnership with the local business improvement district who are funding a post to enable us to do that. We have produced a very streamlined procedure for dealing with people through the community protection notice. We have put all of that through legal. We know when we can drop into putting a notice out to people, so warning a notice and then getting them into court. And that is happening, but as I say, you'll see a slight difference in time from the way it's happening in Basingstoke currently and the speed at which it's happening in Rushmore. But we have identified the key individuals in both areas. We have already issued community protection notice warning letters in both areas, and we are moving towards notice in Rushmore and already at notice with some of those individuals in Basingstoke.
Just going back to the sort of overall performance of the Community Safety Partnership, I was wondering, Carrie and Simon, if you could comment on the issues around gathering data. I note that you talk about the introduction of the new tableau system, which is helping to close some of those gaps. But what further steps need to be taken to make sure that we've got a completely accurate picture of crime and disorder across North Hampshire?
Tableau has made a massive difference, and part of the reason that Tableau has made such a huge difference is because it holds a whole host of information that's not just about crime. It's also about health and demographics and how people want to be contacted and how we're interacting with people. So we have a well-established core group of agencies that provide us with data in order for us to do our strategic assessment. It's not always complete. There are gaps in that intelligence, and we work on that on a regular basis. And that's part of the role of the strategic partnership, is to say, who are the agencies that are failing to provide and how are we going to address that through the partnership. But certainly Tableau has helped to close some of those gaps because a lot of the agencies that we need to be providing data are on that platform.
Simon, you talked about wanting to build a stronger relationship with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. I wonder if you can sort of provide an overview of some of the challenge that has been in establishing links with that office and where some of the opportunities might be for, say, the North Hampshire in forging a closer relationship.
I think one of the points is absolutely about data. You know, I think there's always a challenge for me when you've got different organisations doing what can be potentially different strategic assessments for priorities, that how do you then do they meet in the middle when there should be sort of, it should come through as clear priorities, and some of that data is the same. And there's also something that says the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner is doing lots and lots of work on data and thinking about all of those different elements as far as being able to predict and understand what's happening and why it's happening, and that's very important. There's also something, I think, with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office where, if I go back to Assistant Chief Constable Chilton's comments, where some of that's about making sure that other community safety partnerships are held in as high a regard as ours is, because if everybody's held in such high regard, the voice of everybody in that community will be heard more clearly, because everybody will understand that it's very powerful, very coherent, and we can do something about that as far as making sure those messages join up in the middle. I think there's also something about ensuring the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner understands the level of knowledge and awareness to interpret some of that data with the local knowledge that we have as a local partnership. And that's very powerful as far as understanding, you know, whether it's the police getting their strands of priority to go, well, actually, what does that mean locally? So it's the conversation that's really important. It's the interpretation that's really important, and I think there's also about the value of the partnerships, which is really important, and I think that we're lucky and correct in North Hampshire that as all three local authorities we put the appropriate level of importance on our partnership, and that may not be the same in every other local authority in the county.
Yeah, sure.
Looking at I was puzzling over the idea of this paragraph 3.4 again, that you have a consistent approach. But from what I can see of the data that you've provided, in terms of antisocial behaviour, that data shows that that consistent approach, it may be working in Basingstoke, it may be working in Hart, but it doesn't seem to be working in Rushmore in terms of the offending.
So one of the anomalies that we have when we're preparing a strategic assessment at this moment in time is that we're working with old data. So the data that's actually included in the strategic assessment, because they're the parameters that have been set by the Home Office, is already a year old. I'm sure if I defer to the district commander for Rushmore, he would be able to give you a current picture on what that looks like as opposed to what's in the strategic assessment.
Well, I don't have anything with me, Kerry, data-wise, but it is considerably different from what I saw in the data prepared for the meeting here. I think it's worth mentioning, though, to Councillor Crawford, from a Rushmore point of view, because I oversee two of the three district areas. Of course, I'm here representing the strategic partnership here, but in my day job, I look at tactical options, and they depend on what the particular issues are in a particular town. So are my tactical options for policing and social behaviour, street attached people in Hart, the same as they are in Rushmore? Absolutely not. But over the top of that, as a strategic group, the options and the end-to-end stuff that Caroline mentioned, they are the same. But the tactical options will depend upon the particulars of a particular town, a particular neighbourhood, whatever that might be. Is that fair to say, Caroline?
Thank you for the clarification on that, PCR. Thank you.
At what point do you look for another strategic option if actually on the ground it's not working? You have a consistent approach, all three boroughs, and it seems to be working in two of them, but it's not working in the third.
We're still in early days in terms of the community protection notice process. So we have gone to warning and we're moving towards notice. That means that we still haven't reached the point where we're taking things into court on breach, which we will do. But that's just, it's not that we have rested on our laurels and not changed our approach, because our original approach was to look at a PSPO and see whether that would provide the solution to the problem. We're recognising that that is a string to our bow, but it's not the only string to our bow, and that's had some success but hasn't cured the problem. You then move to what's the next stage of things that we can do. This is an early process. It's been running for about 2 months. We will see that turnover. The point I was trying to make earlier is that we're going to see that slightly faster in Basingstoke because there's a different funding allocation around the staff to do it than we will see in Rushmore, but that process is the same and we will see results.
Do any other members have questions around the performance of the Community Safety Partnership more broadly? The moment. If I can, sorry Alice, I think that you've asked a number of questions around this issue. If I can ask you if we can move on from this, if you have any further questions around that particular data source, I suggest that you take it up with Carrie after this meeting. Just going back to the issue of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, has the partnership at any point sought fundings from that office, and what has been the outcome of those applications?
Yes, we have sought funding, and if I can just touch on what Councillor Bound said about the importance of the data and the importance of those conversations, one of the things that we have made sure of is that we are at the table when those conversations are taking place. So when they were actually developing Tableau, we were at the table to talk about what we needed from it, how we wanted it to work, what the data sets were that we were looking for. When they were developing SafetyNet, which is our information sharing database, we were at the table talking about what we wanted, what we needed, and how we wanted that to look. And that makes us incredibly influential in the right places around those conversations. And it's a similar situation with funding. We have had times in the past where we've been very successful with funding from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, but more broadly than that, we are consulted on around other bids that go in that we're not making. So where bids are made for work to be undertaken in the areas that we are working in, we're able to go to the table and say, well, okay, what are they looking to deliver, and is this a duplication of effort, or is there a gap there that we need to explore slightly more broadly? And when we're talking about bids that are made to the PCC that are pan-Hampshire or Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, we're able to go and represent how is that going to be delivered in the north, because things have a tendency to migrate south. How are we going to make sure that the north is part of that process and is represented within that process? So the bidding round has opened again. There is a really tight window for us to get our bids in. They give us a month to sort all of that up, and we will be making bids this year. And I'm reasonably confident that we will have some success with those bids.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Looking at the members of your Community Safety Partnership, and I noticed, for example, that you've got Step by Step, which is for youth. In Aldershot, we have, and I should perhaps declare an interest because I'm a trustee, the Vine Centre, which deals with adults. And the staff there have a lot of experience in dealing with antisocial behaviour, and they have a whole raft of training programs to engage with these people. So I wonder if it would be possible to approach them to ask them to join.
Happy to approach. We've been working with the Vine for many years now. I know that when we do case conferences, we will often call them in because we know that they have a particular relationship with some of our street attached community. But yes, more than happy to escalate that.
Are there any other questions from members on about this part of the performance review? No? In that case, I suggest we move on to the strategic assessment itself. Now, in the executive summary to this document, 4 priorities are identified. which are antisocial behaviour, alcohol-related violent crime, vulnerabilities and substance misuse. In the first instance, I would just ask for contributions and questions from members about whether they agree broadly that these are the right priorities, and whether there is any other topic or issue that you believe the Community Safety Partnership should give more priority to.
Can I just ask, the front page, page 23, says it's 2017-18, and then if you look at page 25, it says 2016-17 data analysis. So, yeah.
As I explained earlier, we work on back data. So the data is from 16-17, but the strategic assessment is 17-18. Okay.
Sorry, I should have.
That's okay. The priorities are in no particular order, so they're not on the page in order of the priority that we deal with them. These are the priorities that we have said we need to be working towards for this year, and so we build our partnership plan and our partnership activity around tackling these issues in equal measure. So we're not saying that it's the fourth priority. What we're saying is that we have 4 priorities.
One thing I did want to ask about actually is, I think one topic that features quite prominently, I think, in the strategic assessment is that of domestic crime and domestic abuse. And I think it's particularly concerning to read that despite the fact there's been an increase in reported incidents, that actually that might be just the tip of the iceberg, really. And I just welcome your comments about sort of why this particular issue is perhaps not considered a priority sort of by itself.
So the priorities that we have encompass an awful lot of different crime types. So violence would include domestic abuse. We're really fortunate in this area that we have a domestic abuse coordinator. There's no other areas within Hampshire that have a domestic abuse coordinator. We're very well linked in with the Domestic Abuse Forum for Hampshire and with the commission services that are delivered on behalf of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Any increase in domestic incidents is something that we would see as a positive, because that suggests that people are coming forward and reporting things. But there are an awful lot of strands dealing with domestic abuse, and we do not ever rest on our laurels around domestic abuse. We're constantly striving. We're involved in the multi-agency risk assessment conferencing that happens around the high-risk offenders. We are engaged in a number of different programmes for perpetrators, and certainly we put on a massive amount of training in this area for professionals that are working within this arena to make sure that we are upskilling people to all of the new. So when coercion came in as legislation, we put on lots of training around what does coercion mean, what does it look like, how do you work within that as a legislative framework. So we do pay an awful lot of attention to domestic abuse in our day-to-day work.
Thank you. Do members have any other council queries?
The strategic assessment talks about 23% rise in offences involving a bladed implement. Sorry, that obviously this is very timely. We know that in London this is a real problem. We're much smaller areas, but I believe there was an incident locally recently. This is something that unfortunately seems to be a growing crime. Does this these four prioritised areas here. I mean, is knife crime, does it fall into these areas? Because obviously this is something that seems to be an increasing problem.
So we do quite a lot of work in partnership around knife crime, and we do a fair amount of education work in schools around knife crime. Recently in Rushmore we've had a knife amnesty, which is to encourage people to relinquish their bladed articles. We couldn't possibly cover all of the crimes. What we have to do with the strategic assessment is focus so that we're putting the best resources in the best place. But that doesn't by any means mean that we're not cognizant and working along the other crime types. So yes, we know that there's been an increase nationally around carrying bladed articles and knife crime. And we do work within that parameter, but that tends to be something that is a police-led priority, and we work in partnership with the police. I don't know whether our policing colleagues would like to add anything to that.
Yeah, I share those concerns as well, and I think Hampshire was highlighted in the Sunday Times recently as one of the force areas where there has been one of the more significant increases in knife crime. I think it probably carries right. It does cut across some of those other priorities going forwards next year. That might be something to consider as a priority in its own right for the CSP. I'd certainly support that.
So if I could just offer a little bit of clarity around, we recognise that working on such old data is not always useful. By the time we get to the stage where we have a strategic assessment, things have moved on, and so it may well be that now that picture is different, or we've got a different emerging trend. What we have decided to do next year is to do a full strategic assessment in April that will work on a year's data up to April, so that we're doing a strategic assessment that is more in real time than the strategic assessments. But we've had to get approval to do that. So when we're producing a strategic assessment at the moment, that's based on a Home Office model, which is probably 10 years old. And we bank on the fact that we're producing monthly data to go into our vulnerabilities operational group to ensure that we're not allowing things to fall through the gaps, and that we are responsive to some of the things that are coming out in the now.
Yeah, sure. You beat me to it. I was just going to ask, because I really appreciate getting the monthly data that we do from the police locally. It helps us a lot to appreciate what's going on in our areas. So thank you for that. But I was going to comment on page 28. And this again shows the perhaps need to have up-to-date data, because the reference there to the Nepali community being 6.5%. Now that was based on the 2011 census. Well, the ex-Gurkhas, or the Gurkhas and their wives, didn't get the right to settle in the UK until 2009. So 2011 is relatively recent, and there's been thousands more have come in since then, and it could be 12 or 13,000 Nepalis in Rushmore now, and so that's out of it. And I would just comment on the fact that about Rushmore having two of the small areas with the 20% most deprived in the country. Again, because of the way many of the elderly Nepalis have come to live in the centre of Aldershot, and they're living on pension credit, that is the most deprived area in the country in terms of the percentage of people living on pension credit. So, you know, but that's only happened in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So.
I'd just like to offer a little bit of reassurance about that. That's one of the things that Tableau is doing for us, is providing that much more up-to-date demographic information about the changing nature of our communities, and providing us, and with a mind to the changes around universal credits and all of the things that those changes might actually cause for us. I think when we move into an assessment that is much more up to date, we will see a much more meaningful narrative.
Councillor Crisp, you had a question?
Thank you. Yes, well, as a newcomer to this group, perhaps from my understanding, when we talk about vulnerable groups, it may not lie particularly on this committee as such, but they're certainly of a major concern, and that's the huge increase in vulnerable people sleeping rough and on the streets. I don't know how that fits into your data situation, or if it does at all. The second one, again, with huge increases on children, young people being excluded from school. And although there's a charity that I support called Inclusion, which was looking to develop one in my own hometown of Yateley, has had to be cancelled just simply because of cutbacks on transport. And that leaves children who are known to have difficulties to be probably roaming free and vulnerable as well, as probably may well cause issues. So I wonder if those two vulnerable areas, if you can just give me a deeper understanding perhaps of where that sits from this group. Sure.
With regards to homeless people and street attached, of course, yes, they're vulnerable. They come into us on vulnerability on a range of different levels, from mental health, substance misuse, alcoholism, other pre-existing or catalytic events in their lives. And whilst the Community Safety Partnership are not responsible for those socio-economic issues that bring them to that point, we do deal with the impact on our communities that those individuals have. And so, of course, whilst the wraparound services and the support services need to be in place to help these individuals get into whatever treatment they need and to get into a tenancy, we have to make sure that we are providing a balance between the needs of these individuals and the impact that they're having on the community. So yes, they do feature, and yes, they are often talked about. With regards to excluded youngsters, yeah, there are a number of different streams that they can come to us as well, through troubled families, the early help hub. They can be referred from education, or you know, there's a whole range of people that can refer young individuals into us. And yes, we will do everything we can to work with those individuals, recognising that, you know, if they're not causing problems, if they're not involving themselves in antisocial behaviour, if they're not taking up criminal activities or being exploited in any way, then they're probably not going to be a concern for us, but they will be a concern for those other strands.
Do members have any further comments or questions around the selection of these thought priorities? Okay, in that case then, what I suggest we do is move on to questions around the strategic assessment more broadly. If you can ask members to consider these thought priority areas that have been considered, which are outlined throughout the document, and allocate questions accordingly in those areas. So just starting with antisocial behaviour. What's notable is that the number of incidents tends to be a lot higher in some months as opposed to later on in the year. You know, what steps can the partnership take, working in collaboration with other agencies, especially in the voluntary sector, to try and prevent and reduce some of these incidents from happening?
Thank you, Kerry. I suppose I can only relate that to some of the conversations that happen, you know, in our local area. Before every summer holiday, we have that conversation that says what sort of activities are out there? What sort of activities can we help to commission as a local authority? I think there's probably a reality that says also what young people do with their time and how visible they are and how you access them is changing. It's probably not passed any of us by that lots of young people are sitting at home on a PlayStation communicating in a way where you don't necessarily see them and then make arrangements to meet in other places in a way that they wouldn't ordinarily have done historically. They may well have just met outside in their local street and decided what they were going to do from there. So I think there is something that says working on those challenges is one of our key areas. There is something that says, certainly for Basingstoke, you may have some activity out in the suburbs, but there's also the influx that you can have in the centre of town, and working out how you distract those young people and get them to do something else is a real challenge. So there are issues about what that means for how we work with the voluntary sector, how we work with people running youth projects. There's also something about how we work with schools. Schools don't necessarily always have as open a door as I certainly would like to other organisations assisting them with behavioural problems. So a lot of that is about working with the system and trying to improve it. And I suspect as a partnership we're ideally placed to make some of that happen.
I wonder if any of our district commanders would like to offer a view on this particular subject of particularly rise in number of incidents in some months.
Yeah, I'll make comment and then pass back. Antisocial behaviour clearly has a big impact on communities. We've got to be honest with the resources we have at our disposal as to where that sits in order of priority when we're considering things like knife crime, drug-related harm and all that goes with that, domestic abuse, where that sits on the priority order. And so we do have to be really creative in trying to get the best out of other agencies and the voluntary sector in order to do that preventative work.
It's also, I suspect, where local members, local authorities can also play a part with services that are commissioned by others. It would be something that I would cite specifically if I thought about the county-wide service that the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office has commissioned for detached youth work. You know, it is something I specifically have an eye on because it's an important amount of money, it's a significant piece of work, and we need to make sure services that are commissioned to deliver what needs to happen locally.
So I just wanted to say that it's always been seasonal. As the days grow longer and the summer holidays hit, we have always seen a rise in antisocial behaviour, and that's why things like Summer Streets campaign and Summer in the Borough, those things have come up. We've frequently run Where is Your Child campaign, which is around parents knowing where their children are, not believing just because their children have gone out of the door that they're not their responsibility. They remain your responsibility, they're your children. So we've run all sorts of campaigns around that. As we all know, in austerity, those things become harder and harder to do because we don't have the disposable income to make those things happen. And that's why we need to get really smart about how we pool resources and how we bid for money to run those campaigns. But I certainly know that within our education work, we've been in and done school assemblies ahead of Halloween, which is another time that we know we're going to have issues, and ahead of bonfire night to make sure that children are fire aware and around those dangers. So sometimes we have to be a bit creative, but you're never going to be able to stop the antisocial behaviour from happening by virtue of the fact that sometimes it's just kids kicking a ball around and it upsets people, and so there are different tolerances around antisocial behaviour. So we like to think that we're dynamic in our response and that we do as much preventative work as we can within our very limited resources.
Sure, I want you to look at the statistics on page 9. Is it for antisocial behaviour? Table 1, page 9. And there it shows, for example, that in Rushmore, between 2015, 16 and 16, 17, there was a 9% increase in the number of offences, whereas Hart and Basingstoke, it was lower. In fact, Hart showed a decrease. But how would the safety partnership respond to this differential, where it seems to be that the situation's getting rapidly worse? Rapidly more, not worser. So it's getting worse in Rushmore, and compared to Hart and Basingstoke. How does this the safety partnership respond to this kind of difference?
So this would be something that would be tackled through our operational delivery group and by our community safety officers that have a particular remit around antisocial behaviour. Whilst the figures in Hart suggest that there's been a decrease, it doesn't suggest that there is no antisocial behaviour. There's still antisocial behaviour that needs to be dealt with. We have a consistent approach to that. We do issue acceptable behaviour contracts, and we do that in partnership with other agencies. So we've actually in Basingstoke had parents brought in to a conference style event with the police and ourselves to talk to the parents about, did you realise that your children were doing this, where they were actually shown photographic evidence of their children doing things, which was incredibly impactful. We take every one of those instances as by its own merits, so we will look at what are the unique issues around this particular individual's behaviour, and we will address those as and when. But yes, our reaction to that is that we proactively seek to identify young people or anybody causing antisocial behaviour, and that we proactively seek to address that behaviour through a variety of means. In Basingstoke, we have a community court where individuals are referred in and are I want to say tried, but they're not tried. that they come against a group of their peers who will then actually look at their behaviour and talk about why they behave that way and the impact that that behaviour had, and come up with an agreed sentence, if you like, but an agreed reparation out of that process. We have been recruiting for volunteers to staff a Hart and Rushmore community court, and we're looking to start training with those individuals later on this year to have the court up and running early next year. So there are a number of different things that we do around antisocial behaviour.
I just follow on from that on page 37 about nighttime economy related antisocial behaviour in Aldershot Town Centre. This is in the ward that I'm a councillor for. And I've also been on the licensing committee, and when licensing applications come up to extend licensing to 2, 3 in the morning, I've objected to them, but we don't get any support from the police. The police say, oh, well, we've worked out this plan and we've worked out that plan with the particular establishment, and if it's outside the establishment, we can't blame the establishment. But the data shows that overall it's a huge problem in Aldershot Town Centre. So there's this difference between the data, what's the data showing, and what the police actually seem to be recommending in terms of allowing the late night licensing.
So I can't comment on licensing because that's it's not something that I have any control over. We are talking about alcohol-fuelled antisocial behaviour, and the police do put dispersals in place when they're dealing with the busy night times to actually get these people out of the town centres and deal with the issues. But with regards to individual licences, I don't know whether any of our policing colleagues want to comment about that, but I do know that we have a licensing department within each local authority and the police licensing officer who does engage very well across the piece.
Yeah, happy to mention that. So alcohol licensing is dealt with by not directly from local policing resources. There is a team, and I have a dedicated officer that works across Hart and Rushmore that works with the licensing office. Again, this is a strategic meeting, and that some of the data, as we've already mentioned, is old. The PC who works on the licensing team and covers Hart and Rushmore has a very strong influence over what happens in the town centre, and has kept in check a number of the establishments, refusing them extensions of time this year, and we've seen a big improvement and increase in the work that he is doing with the licensing teams in Hart and Rushmore. So whilst obviously, Councillor Crawford, you've got the data in front of you, I'd just say that things are constantly changing. A year is a long time, and we are certainly doing things differently now than we were doing 12 months ago.
Just on the issue of the nighttime economy and antisocial behaviour, it's great to see the recognition for the Street Pastors organisation in terms of the work they do. Specifically here, it's cited the work that they do in Basingstoke and Dean to help to calm aggressive situations and help people who are feeling unwell through consumption of alcohol. I suppose what I was wondering is, sort of how can the Community Safety Partnership work with organisations like Street Pastors to have an even greater impact in tackling this type of disorder in Hart and Rushmore?
I just also wanted to add some detail really before we got to answering that question, because we had a significant increase outside one particular establishment, and I think part of the key was having conversations with Chief Inspector Reid to say, actually this looks like a big figure, but what's underneath the next level of data that says if it is this percentage, how much of that is very low level, and the way crimes are reported. You take that into account, where are we really with significant incidents that we should be concerned about, and concerned about the way that venue is managing their security and their door staff. And I think some of that is absolutely key, because you can look at a very large number, and we probably are predisposed as councillors to look at big figures and then go, well, what's really happening must be this. And I think there is something about getting to that level of conversation to say, what does that really mean? And do we feel on the street, and probably the police are the best partner to tell us that they know what they're doing and we're happy with what they're doing. So I think there's also that to take into account.
In answer to the question about the street pastors, we've always worked very closely with them. We have, in times gone by, funded them, given them training through CCTV. I know that the police have worked very closely and continue to work very closely with them, and will negotiate the hours that they're finishing so that we're not seeing a dribble of people that hang around in the town centres. So certainly, yes, we are very supportive. Yes, we do engage with them, and are more than happy for them to be out there doing the work they do, because we know the value of that work.
Councillor Collins, with the other question.
Yes, yes, thank you. My question I was going to ask has already been answered. It was very similar to Councillor Crawford's, but I do have a second question, if I may. It's to do with the nighttime economy in Hart, and this report actually said that Fleet Central consistently experienced the highest amount of violent offences, etc. I had a conversation with a colleague from the licensing team last week, and something that I was quite surprised to hear, although the colleague suggested that what she'd seen was, she thought was really very good. But as an ex-police officer, it concerns me, and what was put across to me was that security staff from the nightclubs were actively on the streets of Fleet, clearing the streets after the clubs are closed. My question is was that being directed by the police? Because I'm concerned that we have people there that have no legal right to be doing what they're doing, actively acting, if you like, as police officers on the public streets of Hart District Council.
Sorry, we're getting very tactical. I don't have any knowledge of this involvement. I mean, the staff from the nightclub will quite often make sure that when they're outside the club and people are leaving, they'll overview what's going on and have a responsibility for the curtilage outside their building. I certainly wouldn't expect to see them walking down Fleet Road tackling any behaviour. I wouldn't expect that. It's certainly not directed. But we have a very good relationship with the security staff in the nighttime economy in Hart. Certainly that's the reports I get back from the local police and the licensing officer who is in, who works closely with them. So no, we're not. If the question is, you know, are we kind of delegating nighttime economy policing to the staff of the nightclubs? And absolutely not. If they're looking out at the curtilage of their premises and making sure that the people who are paying good money in their premises are leaving quietly, behaving themselves, and moving off to taxis and away, that's absolutely appropriate, I think.
Oh, Councillor Collins.
Thank you. Yeah, if I may, just very quickly, as it was described to me that these people were walking down the high street of Fleet, moving people on the roads, which I think is totally unacceptable.
Are there any further contributions or questions around? I think we've slightly moved into. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carruthers.
As a mum, I am very aware that there is a severe lack of mental health support for young people. I don't think we can underestimate the relevance of this to the rise in antisocial behaviour. I'm referring to young people really, but I'm sure that goes across the board. I see that you are working with mental health people. Yeah, I'd be interested to know a little bit more about this really, because as a parent as well, you know, if you have got a young person who is behaving antisocially, there's not a lot of support out there for parents, and there's not a lot of support out there for these young people who may need some sort of counselling, or, you know, a lot of the time there's a reason behind this behaviour. I don't think we can underestimate how important this kind of support is, and I'd be interested to know more about what you're doing.
There is no way that you can underestimate the impact of mental health at any age, but certainly we're aware that there is a lack of resource in terms of mental health for young people. One of the issues that has been identified is the fact that young people who are looking for that kind of mental health support don't necessarily need to be in CAMS and wouldn't meet the threshold for CAMS treatment. But there isn't another place for them to go. So yes, we have talks with mental health. Yes, we're aware that they've brought out a mental health concordat that is changing some of their approaches. But this is about influencing commissioners who are commissioning those services. And we do that in partnership. We have representation from the clinical commissioning groups. It's slightly complicated for us in Rushmore because we're serviced by Surrey and Borders rather than Southern Health, and so there's a different barrier that we need to get through, but there isn't a quick fix solution. With regards to assistance for parents, I would welcome any parent that feels that they've got problems at home to contact community safety, and we will pull out whatever stops we can to make sure that that parent is supported in addressing those behaviours before they escalate. Our business is keeping young people out of the criminal justice system, not seeing them in the criminal justice system. So early intervention is pivotal to the work that we do. And so if a parent is coming to us and saying, I've got a real concern about my child because of X, Y, and Z, it would be foolhardy for us not to work with that parent in addressing those behaviours.
It's also worth saying that I think that there's something that the partnership could contribute to things that do and are happening when there are identified problems. We know this is an identified issue as far as waiting times to go through the CAMS process. that wait for an assessment can mean you wait a long time, then not to meet the threshold. So parents can get to that point of despair quite early and then go, this must be my only hope, and then to be told, sorry, you don't reach the threshold. There's also a reality that says that is an identified issue. CAMHS is working with quite a lot of partners at the moment to say, how do we support people who are waiting for an assessment? How do we support parents, because they're probably the people that are holding it all together? And linking up at those places where often young people are very keen or sort of able to get support, thinking about the way some schools currently are looking at putting projects together. That's something very specific that I can talk about in Basingstoke, and I think there's then the reality that says if we can prove that model about having those mental health projects where support is given to young people with what we know is an increased level of anxiety which probably wouldn't meet the CAMHS threshold, then support can be given in a place which is easy to access, i.e. a school, to make sure it doesn't escalate. And we work with all of those agencies to do that work.
Just reflecting on the contribution by Councillor Carruthers and this discussion we've been having about mental health, is there any good practice that the Community Safety Partnership can draw from around the country when it comes to collaborations between Community Safety Partnership, CAMHS, and other voluntary sector organisations that support people with mental health issues?
So I certainly know that one of the issues that has been identified elsewhere and has been worked with really well is around building resilience in our young people, because their mental health starts to struggle because they don't have the resilience to deal with all of the things that they are bombarded with as young people, the 24/7 access through social media, just growing up, exams and the pressures that may cause issues at home. So there are models elsewhere that will work with young people to help build their resilience to dealing with those issues. And that takes in a whole host of problems that are faced by young people, such as body image. We've seen an increase in self-harming, and we can work with those individuals, but it really is about saying, what are the tools you need to make yourself better able to talk about, to seek help, to cope with the things that you're facing.
Are there any more contributions and questions on the issue specifically with antisocial behaviour and alcohol-related violent crime? Councillor Chris.
Yes, a couple of issues probably in relation to this. One, I'd probably like to think that we could claim credit within my own community of Yateley for the reduction in that type of things going on, but I know that probably isn't the case, although there has been quite a good move in that area recently, where we've increased the number of outworkers. But I was picking up on the comment you made about lay pastors, street pastors. Mainly that's associated with churches who provide this kind of service, as I understand it, very supportive of it. But we have people who are not necessarily connected in that particular way, who are out on the streets almost every night now in my community, building relationships with young people who could be problematical. The fact that we've recently just opened a dedicated youth centre, so there's a place now for them to go within that, is good. So it all helps, if you like, to start to decrease the amount of problems they have previously been causing. You mentioned you were given some form of support to the street pastors, and I wonder if that itself could be extended to one of my charities, is Vision for Youth, which is what I'm referring to, always open to receiving any help or support they can get in reaching out as young people to other young people. So I leave that one for a thought, perhaps more than an answer, but it would be really good to know that they could have that support through this group itself, knowing that they are going out there, making themselves vulnerable as well. There's a consequence of that, building relationships, which the more you can do that, the less problematical you're going to have with the young people. We know who they are, and they change every year or so because they go through, but another group comes in. So it's a constant sense of knowing that you need to be aware of that and making positive connections. So. Oh, sure.
So yes, we work with Vision for Youth, and have long since known a lot of the people that are delivering actually have a member of staff that volunteers as a youth worker within that organisation, because it's a place that she's very attached to. So places like Yateley are a really good example of motivated communities, and motivated communities are the ones that will be out there providing all of that additional layer. And I guess it's part of our job to motivate communities to be doing those things, and that's something that we will talk about with people, about if we know that we've got a hotspot for antisocial behaviour, well then who do we need to be talking about to tackle that hotspot of antisocial behaviour. More than happy to extend any offers of help, and happy to speak to my contacts within Vision for Youth to see whether there's anything that we can do with them.
Councillor Crawford.
And looking at page 39, and there's a whole section there on community safety patrol officer data, which all seems to be Basingstoke. Is there? Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying.
Currently, it's only Basingstoke that has a community safety patrolling officer team. So they're a team of accredited officers, accredited by Hampshire Police, and they have a raft of powers that they can use. They're a uniformed presence, badged up with the appropriate logo provided by the police. We have recently undertaken training in Rushmore for community patrolling officers to be accredited and to be uniformed and to be able to go out and do that work. We are literally waiting for their powers cards to arrive. The rota has been set up with the local inspector, and we're ready to populate that rota, but certainly it won't be anything in terms of the number that we have in Basingstoke. So we're thinking, we're talking in terms of 3 regular officers and the use of civil enforcement officers on a rolling rota on a monthly basis in Rushmore, whereas we have a team of 12 here in Basingstoke. So you can see that that's a huge resource that's directed by the council. It's not directed by community safety, but certainly is out there offering that presence of reassurance and dealing with some of the antisocial behaviour and related issues that people get upset about.
Just where time's moved. Oh, sorry, yeah, Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you. Just as a small one, the district commander for Basingstoke in the last meeting intimated that he felt the average time for the 101 calls was going to be reduced, and I just wondered if that had come about.
I suspect not, but there is some good news in that online reporting is available now, which we would encourage people to make use of for non-emergency matters, because that will free up the telephone lines for 101 calls. 101 is the non-emergency number. It's probably one of the only agencies in the country that you can get hold of in a non-emergency situation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's the same call takers as answer 999 calls. And in the month of July 2018 compared to 2017, we saw, I think, about an 11% increase in the number of 999 calls comparing those 2 months. And then in the previous one, it was a 9% increase. It's something like 5,000 extra calls, 999 calls that we had to answer in the month of July. The volume of demand on 999 has gone up significantly, and that's not just a Hampshire issue, that's across the country. They will always be prioritised. So I would do everything I could to encourage, if people have got access to the internet, as many people have now, to make use of that to report non-urgent matters. It will end up in the same place as it would as if people called on 101, and I would anticipate that will reduce that demand on the call takers.
And all I wanted to add, I think most councillors will be aware of that scenario where your residents tell you there's an issue, you speak to somebody and there isn't any report, there is very little evidence. That is something that I experience with Chief Inspector Reeves a lot, and I think there is something that says we have for years said dial 101, and I think that has to change to if people can do it online, you report it online, it's quick, it's easy, you can do it at your own convenience, and for those people that can't use the internet or don't have the facility, that's what we use 101 for.
Councillor Crawford, very quickly.
Watch to housing data. Now, as it happens, I carried out last month a survey of housing associations in Rushmore. And one of the questions we asked was, are you having any problems with antisocial behaviour? And you've mentioned Vivid here, and what came out of the survey was that Vivid was markedly worse, according to the responses, in dealing with antisocial behaviour than any of the other housing associations in the borough.
So we work with housing associations, and so today in Rushmore I was talking to a member of staff who was going out to do an acceptable behaviour contract in support of a housing association. They have their own antisocial behaviour officers that deal with things, and if they're not dealing with things, then we would expect that to come through the operational group or to come through to antisocial behaviour officers for it to be picked up. Somewhat in Vivid's defence, I would say that they've been through a process of massive change in the merger between the two housing associations, and that has taken some time to bed in. But certainly, yes, they are on our operational group. They are regular attendees. We have good relationships with them, and we support them around antisocial behaviour wherever we can.
Just to add that, sorry about that. Just to add that sort of time is marching on, so if I could ask us to move on, particularly to the issue with, to the topic of the vulnerabilities, which covers anything from child sexual exploitation, domestic abuse, hate crime, and a number of other areas. And I just wonder if any members have contributions or questions that they would like to raise on those particular issues. I suppose if I could raise a question myself, we see at least from the data that there appears to be a reduction overall in domestic incidents, and I'm just wondering if there's anything we can draw from that when it comes to dealing with sexual offences, especially as the latter has often got a domestic element to it, and whether, again, there's anything that the Community Safety Partnership can do working with other agencies to tackle that issue.
I think that the best thing to say here is that there's a huge landscape of partnerships and boards that operate across all of those vulnerabilities. So to give you an example, there is a Prevent board that deals with violent extremism, people being radicalised. There's a modern slavery board that deals with modern slavery. We have the adult safeguarding board, the children's safeguarding board. So there's a whole raft of meetings that sit around particular topics where we would work in partnership to address issues and to discharge duty, if you like. When it comes to domestic abuse. We sit on the Domestic Abuse Forum for the county. We have our own domestic abuse forums that operate across Safe in North Hampshire. But in addition to that, we have the Serious Sexual Offences Reduction Group for the northern area, which is run by the police, but which we are regular attendees at, where we would look to find those correlations between one thing and another. So yes, there is often, and with the changing in the way that things are recorded, now everything has to be recorded separately. So if somebody comes to you after 10 years of domestic abuse and says, you know, over the last 10 years he did this, he did this, he did this, then we see those separate crimes being recorded, and we will see an increase in things such as sexual crime. But that's not the whole picture. So there's a lot of historical sexual crime of which that would form a part. There are other types of sexual crime. So within the sexual crime reduction group, we would look at what is the picture. So we get a data set where we will look at, okay, so how many rapes have there been, how many historical offences have there been, how many are related to domestic abuse, and then work out a strategy and an action plan to deal with those issues.
Just to follow up with that, so what engagement does the partnership do with other agencies to support those who've been the victim of domestic abuse and sexual offences?
We work in partnership with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, who have commissioned a huge amount of service around domestic abuse. We have the Domestic Abuse Forum, which is incredibly well attended by a whole range of agencies, including Mankind, Womankind, all of those types of agencies, which I say we also provide training to. And we're always looking for the next gap and the next thing that we need to be doing. One of the things we're looking at the moment is how can we set up support groups for protected characteristics where there is domestic abuse. So we might be looking at the LGBT or male victims of domestic abuse, or a subset of our deaf community who might be. So at the moment we're identifying those protected characteristics and saying how can we form support groups and then empower those support groups through facilitation to be better able to deal with those circumstances. So we engage as broadly as we can, and we're always asking those probing questions. I know that in Rushmore we've been very influential with the Nepali domestic abuse worker who's based in the CAB, and there was an awful lot of training delivered and monitoring of that post, which is brought into the forum as well. So wherever we identify something we need to be working with, we will get a group together to deal with.
And just in terms of the funding for these self-help groups, is that coming primarily from the Community Safety Partnership? Is that coming from other sources like the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner?
We are actually working on a bid to go into the Police and Crime Commissioner around this particular piece of work. That's not to say that if the bid is unsuccessful that we won't try and work with partners around resourcing that in a different way, but that becomes far more problematic if we don't have funding there to help us. And there's an incredible amount of learning to come out of those groups, an incredible amount of consultation that will influence the way we deliver our services far more broadly within the local authority and community safety arena. So we're hoping that will be supported by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Is there any more questions in this whole area of vulnerabilities? Okay. I suppose one last thing I'd just like to ask on this is it's acknowledged that the number of sort of self-referrals for domestic abuse from NHS services have been historically very, very low, and it looks like through the work of Karen Evans that action is being taken to try and improve those relationships with healthcare professionals. Could you sort of elaborate on that? And I guess, is there any particular performance indicators or outcomes that you're setting yourselves in terms of trying to increase those self-referrals?
So it'll be the role of the Domestic Abuse Forum to set performance targets around that, and that's not something that the Community Safety Partnership at a strategic level would be engaged in. But certainly, yes, there is work to be done around this, and we are engaged in it. Karen is very, very proactive in the way she's working and the people that she's working with. And as a community safety strategic partnership, we would be expecting to have some feedback or performance reports coming in around work that she undertakes, so that we can make sure that it's going in the right direction, the right people are involved, and that we're moving it forward and removing barriers that might exist.
Oh, Councillor Collins.
The quick question is drugs related, if I may. I think it was back in June, myself and Councillor Oliver from Hart attended a brilliant presentation in Basingstoke from Op Fortress with regards to county lines. At that time, Basingstoke was obviously the concern for the three boroughs, if you like. I just wondered whether that situation from that period has got any better, got any worse, or whether it's spread further across the three areas.
I think it's fair to say that Basingstoke would still be the main area of concern, largely due to the demographics and the number of Class A drug users who live in Basingstoke, Rushmore to a lesser extent. My policing experience across all three districts tells me that it is less of an issue in Hart. It still bubbles up a little bit, but John, I don't know whether you would say any different, but Hart would be less of a concern, I would think, than the other two districts. It's an ongoing priority for us here in Basingstoke. In fact, I've been out executing a search warrant myself this morning, so yeah, it's ongoing work.
Yeah, thanks for the comments about the Fortress presentation, which myself and Matt helped put together. Actually, it was really there were some good speakers that day, weren't there? No, from Hart and Rushmore point of view, our focus is predominantly Rushmore. We never take our eye off the ball in relation to Hart, though. There is no hard border, of course. It just so happens that some of the main issues we have are in Rushmore, and that's where our main proactive focus is around, as Matthew mentioned.
Just, sorry, Councillor Crisp.
Just for clarification, I think, if we're looking at that page 29, table 2.9, relating to the statistics table on the next page, I'm looking at the figures with regarding to rape. Could it just be clarified whether these are recorded crimes, whether people who were they convicted of those offences, or it was just recorded, not necessarily convicted? Thank you.
So the data that we're looking at here is around recorded incidents. It's not around outcomes. So that would be a completely separate piece of intelligence gathering and analysis.
Yeah. Particularly using rape, because often it's been seen as one of the areas where to get a successful conviction is more unlikely than perhaps some of the others. And glad to see the only area that's actually reduced in that area is Hart. So again, it's not a positive there, because every other area seems to be going up slightly. Yeah. Okay. Look again.
If I can just clarify that, as I said earlier, I think the increase around that crime type tends to be connected to historical crime rather than crime so it's historical reporting. So if you go through the data that's provided for the serious sexual offences group, we don't have a prolific stranger rapist, or we don't have that kind of, and I think that's the image that is brought to mind. It tends to be historical reporting.
Yeah, on the issue of drug dealing and that kind of thing, what I've picked up from our local community is that they don't have any confidence that when they see something, there's a lot of people see things, that if they report it to the police, they don't hear any outcome. And I just wonder if there's a way of, how shall I put it, instilling confidence in the public that they must report these things when they see them, so that the intelligence can be gathered and the intelligence is actually used.
Fight for that one. Fundamentally, it's something that I feel really passionately about. In my ward, absolutely, I have had lots and lots and lots of complaints about activity in the street. And of course, people will always say to you, and it will be all over Facebook, I've called the police, nothing ever happens. And I think there's a really key role here for elected members to say, when that drug raid happens, when those 2 flats, which is what exactly happened 6 weeks after, 8 weeks after those reports were happening, to remind residents this is a direct connection to the report you made 8 weeks ago. If you're expecting a police car to turn up because you reported a drugs deal, that is not necessarily going to happen, because we all know the police, quite rightly, are trying to disrupt people further up the food chain. And I think there is something absolutely about everybody taking that role as far as educating people to understand how the criminal justice and policing today works, which is very different from perhaps other people's experiences historically, which is why things like if I've got a resident that says, you know what, it happens outside my house every day and I can't wait for 40 minutes on 101 every time I see a report, something like the online reporting is key to turn around and say, take 4 minutes, report it, and that's really important to go to those teams who are doing the investigation, who are creating the intelligence, which means the drug raid can happen in the right place at the right time and be really successful getting those people responsible.
PCR, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Crawford, really good point. In the last 10 days, the neighbourhood team in Fleet conducted a search warrant in an address in Albany Close, based on local community intelligence about drugs, and the arrest was made. Last week, my neighbourhood team in Aldershot arrested in the street a dealer with found in possession of spice, and just earlier on this week, my neighbourhood team in Farnborough, based on community intelligence, did 2 simultaneous warrants based on community intelligence around drug dealing. All of these have had media releases put out. Often, apart from the proactive arrest in the street for the spice dealer end of last week, the other ones were based on numerous bits of intelligence rather than one piece. We sometimes have to build a picture. We're never going to be able to necessarily go through a door on one piece of community intelligence. So often that might take weeks, months, maybe even a little longer to build a full picture. So the work is being done out there, and we are trying to make the best use of our media and communications team to highlight the good work when it's being done. But as Councillor Bound mentioned, it would not be possible always to update everybody who has given us the information. So we try and use the media as best we can. We have in the past used, when we've done drugs warrants, community drug warrants, we've used Fortress advertising, sort of large posters put on around the area. So your neighbourhood team have been acting upon local intelligence and have done a warrant today. So we try and do our best in keeping people up to date, but it's not always going to be possible to be personal about it.
Thank you, PCR, thank you. If I could just follow up the point that Councillor Collins made around County Line drug supply. Obviously, you know, I think it's good to see this being acknowledged as a driver of the exploitation of vulnerable adults and children. And I'd just be interested to know sort of what work the Community Safety Partnership does to work with Hampshire and other partners in terms of tackling the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking.
So we're members of the Modern Slavery Partnership. Previously have worked with the police and a range of agencies who ran an operation to go to car washes, for example, looking at modern slavery that's within those groups. We are responsible for including modern slavery is part of our training around safeguarding because it deals with vulnerability, and clearly the partnership is where we will get that trend information and we will be told what we're looking at now, where are our places of concern, and they're things like nail bars and takeout restaurants and agricultural or chicken farms, those kinds of places. But it's really our role is to make people aware of modern slavery, is to help people to identify those that might be vulnerable to modern slavery so that we can all play an active role in reducing the incidence of modern slavery.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or contributions the members would like to make about the strategic report, strategic assessment overall? If not, I'd just like to bring us on to the recommendations, which can be found on page 61, and it'd be good to get members' contributions and questions around these particular recommendations, whether there is anything that members think that the partnership should be adding to these statements. Councillor Collins.
Thank you. If in relation to one of those recommendations there, they consider the public space protection orders in relation to the town centres. That's already been done for Fleet, and on the recommendation of the police, it was thought it wasn't necessary at this time.
Would you like to respond to that, Carrie?
So we worked with the police and we did a public survey, we did a data trawl, we looked at all of the evidence. When you're doing a public space protection order, you have to make sure that you're working in a proportionate way. So you have to be able to evidence the problem in order to put the order in to address the problem, and there simply wasn't enough evidence in Hart for us to say, yes, we'll have a public space protection order. That doesn't mean that we won't deal with things in the town centre. It means that we will go down other routes, such as the community protection notice.
Just on the first recommendation around assault data collection, I suppose the question I would have is sort of what resource will it require you to undertake that work, and sort of how much time that is likely to take up.
I've had conversations with public health. There is a requirement for hospitals to provide a certain amount of data, and previously that has happened, and then it's stopped happening because of resource implications, not just for us but for the hospitals, because they provide that data on point of entry at accident and emergency. There is a data collection group that is still running in Frimley Park, and we do have membership at that. The bit that we need to join up with is re-establishing the link in Basingstoke Hospital so that we can start getting data through that will help us to understand, firstly, incidents that aren't reported, but there is injury for whatever reason, and people then self-present. That gives us a picture about where they were last drinking or what the incident was. It can give us ideas about who we need to go and talk to with regards to licensing that we wouldn't get any other way. And with the partnership in Frimley Park has previously been incredibly effective. There's always nervousness around the hospitals and NHS for sharing information. So sometimes that can cause us problems, but we continue to strive for that information sharing, at least around the minimum data set that they're required to share with us.
Just on the second recommendation, sort of where you're talking about continuing to develop work around vulnerabilities with the hope of reducing pressure on agencies. So just wondering, sort of, what does that look like in practice? You know, how are you sort of planning to measure that outcome?
So one of the things that we do know is that the nature of the vulnerabilities that we're working with are very complex. So we're just talking about street attached, we'll be talking about dual or tri diagnosis and how difficult it is that we've got people out in the street who either have untreated mental health conditions or undiagnosed and untreated mental health conditions. And so it's looking at how can we understand that better, and then how can we work in partnership to reduce the risk around those individuals whilst we're trying to get them into whatever services they need to be in. So there's something around the multi-agency risk management framework which has been developed at a county level, and at what point we invoke that framework so that we can make sure that everybody that's involved, it's not always community safety or the police that need to be leading on something. It may well be that there is an outreach worker that has developed a really good relationship with somebody, because by virtue of that relationship they're the ones that should be the conduit for getting into this person, because there's an element of trust already established. So it is about saying we've got lots and lots of complex cases, and we need to understand them a bit better and then understand how we need to work within that environment.
Thank you. Is there any further questions, Councillor Crawford?
So if I can deal with those things one by one. We started off with the PSPOs. They are a geographical area, it's a predefined geographical area, and that has to be based on evidence. So we can't just say, well, we'll have a PSPO that covers a broader area unless we can evidence that those issues exist in a broader area. Where there is where we are actually forcing those areas out, we can vary the PSPO to include those areas, but we will keep displacing, and we understand that happens. That's always been the case. So even with the designated public place orders, that was something that was a risk. So the public space protection orders have to be proportionate, they have to be evidence-based, and you can really only lawfully operate a PSPO where you can prove that that problem is persistent, consistent, unreasonable in nature. With regards to the meme, it is making every adult matter is something that is run in Basingstoke, so I wouldn't expect you to have a lot of prior knowledge about it. It's a range of agencies that come together to do a wraparound service specifically for our street attached. So this is where we would provide ongoing support for those people who persistently fail because of their chaotic lifestyles and complex needs to find themselves in secure tenancies and in services that can help them address their misuse, their substance misuse or alcohol misuse behaviours. So yes, that's something that runs in Basingstoke. And the use of Pestello, that's just about us saying that we need to use more information that is, if you like, is qualitative rather than quantitative information that feeds in to this document. So that's looking at a range of demographic, mosaic, all of those kinds of things to make sure that we're giving a more rounded picture of what's happening.
Oh, Councillor Crisp.
The 3 town centre locations, which 3 towns are there? Because there's at least 5 in the whole of the area, towns that is. Yes. So which ones are included in this and which ones are excluded?
We have a PSPO in Basingstoke Town Centre, we have one in Aldershot Town Centre, and we have one in Farnborough Town Centre.
Providing there's sort of no further questions and members are broadly satisfied with the recommendations that's been provided as part of the strategic assessment, I propose to sum up. So I think we've had quite a wide range in discussion around the 4 priority areas that have been identified by the Community Safety Partnership, particularly in relation to antisocial behaviour. We've been talking a lot, I think, about the nighttime economy and related alcohol-related crime. I think what I hear from members tonight, I think, is perhaps a need for the partnership to ensure that it expands on the collaborations that it has with voluntary sector organisations, whether that's in funding or in other areas, in order to help tackle these specific issues of antisocial behaviour across the 3 districts. I think we also heard tonight a desire for the Community Safety Partnership to do more to collaborate with CAMS and other agencies around projects to tackle mental health issues, particularly when it comes to young adults, with the hope of reducing crime across the 3 districts. And we've been also talking a lot about the collaborations that the partnership has, working to tackle substance misuse and related vulnerability issues. So I propose bringing this particular item to an end. Item number 7 is around exclusion of the press and public. I don't think there's any sort of confidential issues that we've discussed here that need to be dismissed. So moving on to item number 8, confidential exempt ideas. Again, nothing that needs to be raised there. In that case, members, I bring this meeting to an end. Thank you for coming here tonight.